Welcome to the Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio, saving you time, money, and your sanity as you build a better life post-divorce. I'm Deborah Moskovitch, divorce consultant, educator, and author of The Smart Divorce. And along with my co-host, Steve Peck, we're going to bring you the leading divorce experts across North America, providing insight, tips, and strategies for managing divorce during the process and afterwards. Strategies and advice for building your post-divorce happiness, and of course, what divorce means for your children. Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Very well, thanks. I've been thinking a lot about the divorce process, wondering, how did you arrive at your separation agreement? Was it amicable? Was it a little on the acrimonious side? Did you have to go to court?
Heck no, it wasn't amicable. I mean, if it was amicable, I don't think I would have started Divorce Source Radio. Now, there were all kinds of problems with mine.
Yeah, which is why I wrote The Smart Divorce, right? I went to court. I had a few experiences in court. I had to litigate. I went to court and I learned a lot of lessons. Number one is that there's no crystal ball. I thought that the last time I had gone to court, it would be a slam dunk. I thought I had a clear-cut case. I thought for sure we were going to win. And guess what? We didn't. And I think that the reason that we didn't win was the way that a piece of evidence was presented by the other side. And that was an email that one of my children had sent to their father. The other side said that that email was not written by my children, but was indeed written by me. And I think that that's what swayed the judge. Now, can you imagine, I was flabbergasted when that email was presented because I didn't write it. But it's all in the perceptions and all in the way that things are presented. So I've learned a couple of lessons that I think we need to share with our listeners.
Okay.
Number one, some matters don't belong in court. I think that you really have to understand that. Two, you're letting a stranger make decisions for your family. That judge doesn't know who you are, what your children are capable of. They don't know your parenting abilities. They really don't know anything. It's all subject to what they read in an affidavit and whether or not they read that statement, right? And there really is no certainty of any outcome. So if you're going to court, really understand what it is that you're up against and work very closely with your lawyer in terms of what your lawyer thinks the outcome might be and what are the stumbling blocks towards success.
Well, in Michigan and a lot of states, most divorces never make it to litigation. They end in mediation. So, and all of my attorneys tell me, you don't want to litigate. I mean, that's the last place you want to be. So I ask you, why did you end up in litigation and who would end up there and why?
That's a really good question, and we're going to pose that as our guest today. But why did I end up in litigation? Because I think the emotions were so high that it got to the point where it was a very, very high conflict, number one. Number two was when you're not getting full financial disclosure, you have no choice but to go to court.
All right, so you weren't receiving information that you believed was there.
Correct. But you know what's interesting? Because, you talk about mediation and we were going to talk about litigation today, but we tried to mediate a settlement. Came up with, I thought, was something that was fair and reasonable. But one of the sides wouldn't sign the agreement, so we had to end up litigating. We had to go to court. And I have to tell you that the outcome in litigation was very, very much the same as in mediation, with a huge difference. The emotions were very high because going to court is war. It's an all-out war. And number two, the costs to going to court are outrageous. How expensive could it be? Because you're not paying for the judge. The government's paying for that. But if you go with a lawyer, you're paying for your lawyer's time. And just because they say your appointment to appear in front of the judge is at 9 o'clock in the morning, you might not see that judge at 9 o'clock in the morning. You might not see that judge until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's a lot of time to sit around and pay your lawyer for not working on your file because you're prepared already for the court. I recommend you do everything you can to avoid going to court. The negative impact on going to court is quite dramatic on the family. If you are fighting over custody and access issues especially, do you know that the dropout rate for one of the parents is very high? Bob Emery, and listeners, you might want to Google Dr. Robert E. Emery and look at his mediation study versus litigation study, because what happens is after a period of time, I guess because the emotions are so high and what happens to the litigation process, I mean, there's so many different things that that parent who is the non-custodial parent, chances are the relationship is lost or is deteriorated very significantly. So why would you want to go to court? Unless there is serious financial issues and there is no disclosure, or if one of the parties wants to move out of the country with the children, well, you can't really mediate that. I think it really does need a judge, the impact of a judge to make that decision. But for the most part, I think that families really should try to find an amicable solution. And when you think about the matrimonial assets that are being divided, do you not want to keep that in your family? Do you want to be spending thousands of dollars, if not some families are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars with their lawyers? I live in the suburbs and I would love to live in the city. And my mother often says to me, if you didn't go to court, you could be living in the city. That's how much money I spent going to court.
Yeah, and you're right. There are some legitimate reasons why you would want to go to court and litigate. Like you can't find the money. But one of the family court judges I spoke with said that sometimes it's just that anger, that people are so angry they want to be heard. And sometimes in the divorce process, you're not really being heard because you've got your attorney, they've got their attorney, and you're not talking directly. It's all going through attorneys. And so court provides these super angry people a platform to air it all out.
I agree. And there's another thing that you have to be aware of. There's your brand of justice and the legal brand of justice. And just because you think you're right doesn't necessarily mean the law is going to find you right. The only thing you're really going to end up with are legal bills. So your brand of justice might not necessarily be the legal brand of justice. And the other thing is when you talk about the emotions and, who's right and who's wrong and why the marriage ended in the first place, or perhaps people feel deceived, whatever it is, it's no-fault divorce. So the reasons behind the marriage downfall, for the most part, don't matter. Now, you might want an apology. You might want it to matter. But in the court of law, it doesn't matter.
I agree, although I've been told if, let's say, you're a gambler and you've been spending a lot of money gambling, at that point, it's no fault regarding the divorce, but regarding the settlement, that'll come into play at that point.
Absolutely. 100%. And that's why if you are going to court, I suggest that you look for a lawyer who has a strong ability in trials. And you're not going to go to a lawyer who has no expertise in litigating.
Well, how many people do you think have really good lawyers? A lot of the listener feedback I get through email, that's the number one complaint I hear. They don't have good lawyers. They don't feel they're being heard.
Well, then I think that one of the things they need to do is really take that time, do their due diligence, and interview lawyers. What is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for a collaborative lawyer? Are you looking for a lawyer who's more settlement-oriented? Do you know specifically that you have to go to court? Whatever your issues are, that's the type of lawyer that you should be looking for. Now, people will say that I can't afford lawyer X, and that's the best lawyer to take me to court. But you know what? I think that if you really did your homework and you interviewed lawyers and you went for consultations, you could find a lawyer to meet your needs.
I think sometimes with some of our listeners, they've just been told that their spouse has filed for divorce and their head is spinning. Their whole life is flashing before their eyes. They're not in the right mindset maybe to make these types of decisions.
I know, exactly. I agree with you 100%. And that's why they need to listen to the show last week when we talked to Dr. Robert Simon about the emotions ramping up at the first few weeks of the divorce process and what do you do and should you be retaining a lawyer. I think that sometimes you need to slow down that process. I don't think that you can be expected to retain a lawyer right away. Some people need to process that information. And oftentimes for those that are in denial, they've been blindsided. There's no way that they are ready to go out and retain a lawyer and know what they need and what's in the best interest of the children. I think they need to slow down a little bit. Today is about litigation with our guest, Justice Harvey Brownstone. He's got extensive expertise in family law matters and was appointed to the bench in 1995. And I think that that's really important because oftentimes people could go to court, and when you look at the decision maker, sometimes the judge does not have family law experience, and you cannot pick your judge. You cannot pick your decision maker. So anyone who's sitting in Justice Brown's courtroom is very fortunate because he's got so much expertise, and not only is he a city court judge, he's the author of the best-selling book called Tug of War. His high visibility in Canadian society has made him one of the most recognizable faces of the Canadian justice system. Between the book and his online TV show called Family Matters with Justice Brownstone, which, by the way, I was interviewed in, and I have to say that that was one of the most personal interviews I've ever had. So you might want to listen to that interview, listeners. Justice Brownstone has been described as a maverick judge who is a pioneer that is unilaterally changing the public image of the judiciary. He's also been awarded the Colleague in the Spotlight Award from the Canadian Bar Association Judges Forum. So whether you're Canadian, American, European, wherever you're listening, the information is relevant to you because we're not talking about the specifics of litigating. We're going to talk about what goes on in the courtroom and what goes on in the judge's mind.
Very cool. Well, let's welcome him to our show. Justice Brownstone, welcome to Divorce Horse Radio.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
First of all, I have to say, Justice Brownstone, that I read your book, Tug of War. I read it a number of times because I think the message that you have in there is so important, and that is, really, if you're considering litigating, think again. And I think for any of our listeners, if you're contemplating divorce, if you're contemplating litigating, whatever the divorce process is that you want to pursue, this book is a great reality check, and I think it's a must read. So wherever you live, doesn't matter if you're in Canada, the UK, Europe, wherever you are, the information in this book really relates to wherever you are.
No kidding. And Justice Brownstone, I want to jump in and thank you too, not only for the book, but for your television show online on FamilyMattersTV.com. I mean, it's amazing what you're doing, a judge reaching out to help others. So thank you so much for all you do.
Well, I very much appreciate the positive feedback, Steve and Deb. You know, I thought it was time for a judge to break out of the traditional mold of adjudicator in the courtroom and reach out to educate a very, very needy public in the same way that you did, Deb, with your fabulous book. I recommend it to litigants about 85 times a month. And I think it's really, really important that people have their eyes open when they're going through a very emotionally traumatic experience, like a separation.
So do you find, though, that your litigants react differently to you now that since you've written the book and you've got your TV show, or are they the same?
Well, not all of them have read the book, and frankly, not all of them are capable of absorbing what's in the book and then applying it to their own lives. So, no, I don't think people really treat me differently. I get a lot of feedback about the online show, though, because it's gone viral and it reaches about 50,000 people a day. So I do get a lot of comments, particularly about the mediation episode and the collaborative law episode and the one about how to manage your lawyer. But no, you know, once I'm in the courtroom, it's a case of trying to adjudicate their issues, but the people who've read the book certainly have their eyes open and they are more able to predict what's going to happen than the people who haven't read it.
Right. Okay, well, speaking of predicting what happens, I think this is a good lead into my first question. In your book, you talk about court cases that they're supposed to be truth-finding exercises, but litigants quickly learn that cases are not decided on the basis of what actually happened. A judge cannot know for certain what actually happened because he or she was not there to see it. The best we can do is to make decisions on the basis of what can be proved. And don't you find that people want their day in court? It's kind of like a Perry Mason episode where they think, someone's going to confess and admit that one person was right and one person was wrong and justice is served, but it doesn't work that way. What advice do you have for people regarding their expectations?
Well, I think that the biggest mistake that people make is not that they think that somebody's going to confess. I don't think most litigants I see are naive enough to think that under the strain of a court appearance, their ex-partner is going to admit wrongdoing. But I think that the vast majority of people who come to court think that they're going to be validated or vindicated in some way by the judge, and that they are going to be told that not only were they right, but that they were the victim. Everybody that comes to family court really feels like they are the victim in the relationship. Nobody thinks that they're the perpetrator. They all think they're the victim. And they really seem to need somebody in authority to tell them that they were right, they were the one that was hard done by, and it's very frustrating for them when they don't get that, because most judges are not interested in rehashing the details of the breakup and looking for fault. You know, we're not in a fault-finding exercise. We're trying to move forward and create parenting plans or settle financial issues. We're really not interested in rehashing the past. You know, I think that parents who come to court with those expectations of getting some form of vengeance are very, very disappointed and frustrated by the whole system, and especially they're disappointed by the judge.
Deborah, that's a huge message, right?
That is a huge message, and I think that's really important, Justice Brownstone, because there's no fault divorce. So it doesn't matter who's at fault for the breakdown. Just as you say, it's the law that dictates.
Let me say this about that, Deborah, and Justice, you can tell me your feelings. I've seen sometimes in court where, let's say, there's been an affair in a relationship, and maybe the wife has been cheated on, and she's in court, and she's trying to prove all of this, and she's looking for someone to tell her that she's right. And it's just not going to happen that way, is it?
Well, I mean, the fact that somebody was unfaithful doesn't really matter. It's not relevant. And because we don't, marital conduct is not relevant unless it impacts on the parenting. And a lot of people think it does impact on parenting. So, for example, there are many, many, many people out there who believe that if you were a bad partner, you are also a bad parent. But the law and even common sense should tell us that that's just not the case, and that somebody can be a very good parent even if their behavior as a partner was not good. And that's not just infidelity, but that can even go to forms of abuse. It can go to financial irresponsibility. I've seen many parents that were gambling addicts or financially irresponsible, and many parents, frankly, who were abusive to the other parent, but they were actually good parents to their children if the abuse didn't take place in front of the children, of course. See, my goal in family court is to not make things worse. You know how doctors always say, first, do no harm?
Right.
Yep.
Well, I think judges should do the same. And so I don't want parents to be bigger enemies of each other at the end of a court case than they were at the beginning. And yet that's what litigation most often achieves. And so anything that's going to prolong the dispute or aggravate the dispute is something that certainly I think most judges try to avoid, because we're very acutely aware that parents need to deal with each other long after that court case is over.
Absolutely. And you know that research shows that when parents litigate, the chances of one parent losing a relationship with the children are much higher than mediation.
And that's something that parents don't know. You know, they don't know it. I really do think that most parents believe that if they come to court, it's going to make things better for them. They have this distorted image of what it is to win. They don't realize that there is no winning in family court. There's only degrees of losing. And the biggest losers are the kids, of course. But and that's why I wrote the book, because I thought it was important to get that message to parents before they come in front of a judge, when it's already too late. You know, they've already launched themselves into these catastrophic, high conflict, protracted lawsuits. And I often used to think, if I could just reach these people, if I could have reached them before they started their court case, I think I could have prevented all this carnage that I'm seeing now. So I wrote Tug of War to try to reach out to parents before they make those big mistakes. And I think in your book, The Smart Divorce, you were, one of the first to tell parents, you've got to treat this like a business decision, a business relationship, you've got to put aside your emotional baggage and start thinking objectively about this dissolution of a relationship in a very clinical way, in a way that is completely devoid of emotionality. And I think that message that you conveyed was crucial. The problem, of course, is that you have to be intelligent enough and articulate enough and mature enough to actually be able to absorb that and apply it.
Mature, for sure. And I agree with both of you. But, I mean, how do you take these divorcing partners who have so much anger and show them that they need to remove that?
Well, one of the ways we do it when they're arguing over their kids, one very effective way that I find that quickly refocuses parents is to tell them that if they keep slinging mud at each other, I have the right to decide, it's my duty to decide who I believe. And if I happen to believe both parents that neither of them is suitable, then I have to look at alternatives like foster care. And I find that very, very frequently will bring parents back to reality here, that a custody battle is not necessarily going to be decided by giving the children to one or the other parent. The judge does have the right to call in the Children's Aid Society or a child protection agency and look into whether these children need to be placed in a foster home because neither parent is suitable.
Wow, what a wake-up call.
No kidding.
It's a very serious wake-up call, and of course we don't make that kind of threat lightly, but unfortunately, it happens a lot that children are unable to be placed with either parent because of the poor behavior that the parents are demonstrating in front of their children.
Well, what fuels all of this in a high conflict divorce? Is it the ego? Is it hurt? Or do they just want to get even?
I think that most people that we see are in terrible pain. And, that's normal. I mean, nobody goes into a relationship, especially if you have children with somebody, you don't go into that thinking it's going to end. And it's very, very normal to feel betrayed and full of pain and anger and resentment. And so it shouldn't be surprising to anyone that these emotions are running very high. But the problem when you have children is that if children are caught in the middle of these kinds of conflicts, that is child abuse. And a lot of parents just cannot distinguish a bad partner from a bad parent, and they can't distinguish their behavior as reflecting badly on their parenting. But judges are always watching out for what these children must be going through. And I just today in court, I said to a couple who were really had been litigating incessantly for years. I said to them, I'm a 54-year-old adult and I'm a judge and I work here and I am feeling very stressed by what you are showing me today and your behavior. I wonder how your children must feel.
Wow.
Strong message.
Yeah, great point.
In terms of finding out how the children must feel, I know that there's a lot of discussion amongst the judiciary, especially in Canada and overseas, about judges interviewing children. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually talk about it in the book. I'm not a big fan of it. In the United States, there are a number of states, and actually a growing number of states, where the court is required to meet with the child, not so much to ask the child who he or she wants to live with, but more like a meet and greet to just kind of get to know the child, let the child know how the decision is going to get made, make sure the child understands that the child is not responsible for any of this. I think that it is a growing trend in Canada, but my personal view is that if the child's wishes and preferences need to be before the court, and they do if the children are adolescents and up, then I think the best way to get that evidence is through either an assessment or a lawyer appointed for the child. I really worry that just meeting a child once in a very artificial setting is quite traumatic for a child. I have no way of knowing what the parents have said to that child before they came to court, what kind of grilling that child's going to get afterwards from the parents.
Yeah.
I think it really it's a lot of pressure for a child to have a meeting like that with a judge. So I don't do it unless it's really urgent. Sometimes before Christmas holidays, we get a lot of parents litigating over what's going to happen to the kids over Christmas because they've each made opposite plans at opposite ends of the world. And sometimes, you need the 13-year-old or 14-year-old to come to court and tell you, what do they want to go to Disney World or do they want to go to that family reunion in Corner Brook, Newfoundland?
Easy choice right there. And, in California, I was talking to a lawyer the other day, and now kids in California have the opportunity to provide their say. And then the question was, well, is their say always adequate? I mean, they can be persuaded, right? I mean, they want to live with the parent, perhaps, that they deem the easiest to live with.
Well, that's the thing. And, I don't think kids should be given the message that they get to decide. I know that Deb would agree with me. When she divorced, she had 3 very young kids. I don't think she would have wanted them to think that they get to decide this because it's not fair to them to have to choose which parent they love the most.
Absolutely. Very tough. You don't want to do that to your children.
I think a lot of parents do think that their kids should decide. And frankly, when I started out as a judge, I did interview kids a lot. And I found that children almost always said one of 2 things to me. Either they want their parents to stop fighting. Could I just make the parents stop fighting? Or they would say, could you make my parents get back together so I could live with both of them? And those were the 2 wishes, of course, that we can't grant. I don't think that the age of the child should have anything to do with whether parents stay together or not. I don't think, and I do think that kids know when their parents are not happy. So, we all know couples that have stayed together for the sake of the children. But if you talk to those kids, especially when they grow up, they will tell you that they knew their parents were not happy and that they witnessed a lot of tension and stress. And now with the recession, we are seeing huge numbers of couples who have remained together under the same roof, but really living separately. And this can be very, very stressful for the parents and the children. And, it's something we deal with, but it's I shudder to think of what kind of a life that is for the kids.
Deborah, do you deal with that a lot with your clients, that situation?
I do. And, for economic reasons, there are many couples that live under the same roof for a very long time. And I think for children to see their parents sleep in different bedrooms, to split the weekends, to act divorce when the parents are both living at home is very stressful on the children. It sends out a bad message, I think, in terms of what a healthy relationship is. I think that parents would have a much healthier relationship if they could co-parent effectively living in separate households.
Well, it's like that. You remember that song, Neither One of Us Wants to Be the First to Say Goodbye?
Gladys Knight.
Good old Gladys Knight, I think really what we're talking about, the title of the song would be Neither One of Us Wants to Be the First to Leave the House.
Yeah, but I also think that there's a lot of myths. There's one school of thought that says, well, if I leave the house, then I'm going to be charged with abandonment. And so I'm not going to have access to my children. I think that there's a lot of confusion about what custody is, what access is, decision making. I don't think people really understand all the nuances.
Great question.
I think that's true, and that's why I always tell people you should, don't make any moves without going and seeing a lawyer. If you're worried that your rights to the home are going to be affected or your custodial rights might be affected, go and see a lawyer. But, what we're talking about today is what's best for kids, and it is not good for kids that parents live together in high conflict. That's not good for children.
No, and children and how well children do post-divorce matters in terms of how well parents do. And if parents aren't doing well, no one's going to do well.
Well, and more than that, when you talk long-term post-divorce, we all know that children who have witnessed marital discord are at great risk of experiencing the same thing in their own relationships because we learn about relationships from what we saw our parents do. And right. If your only role models are 2 parents who don't communicate, can't cooperate, and treat you like you're some piece of property or a spy or a weapon, then it's going to be hard for you as you grow up to trust, to form healthy attachments to other human beings in a romantic way. We all know this. And I tell parents all the time, you are writing the story that your children will tell about their childhoods. You're writing it. And I show the parents the court file, and I hold it up. And, they're usually pretty thick, these files. And I say to them, this is the story you are writing. And is this what you want your children, when they grow up, to read about who you were as parents? Because that's what they're going to know.
And not only that, for them to read what's in the affidavit, like that is I found when I went through the court system, to have to read this affidavit and have all this mud slung at me was really difficult. So there is no chance for any kind of amicable relationship.
Well, that's very true, and I think it's the most painful part of being a judge. I think I speak for a lot of judges when I say we wanted to be judges because we thought we could help people. We thought we could make things better, one family at a time, and but when you really look at the satisfaction level among litigants with the court system, when you look at what kind of relationship these people have after litigation, this isn't universally true, but I would suspect that the vast majority of people that I see in my court are not able to get along with each other better after the court case than they were before.
Why do we always have to have a battle? I mean, why can't we just divorce peacefully?
Well, I think a lot of people do. There's no question that the vast majority of couples who break up do not go to court. And the experts tell us it's about 5%. 5% of all couples end up going to court. And many of them do have personality disorders. There's no doubt of that. So I think that, all of us know people who did not go to court and were able to work it out through, negotiating a separation agreement or going to someone like Deborah, reading her book, getting the message, reading my book for that matter, So I always remind myself that it's not everyone that ends up in court.
No, as a matter of fact, I would say about 98% of my clients look for alternative dispute resolutions. And in terms of alternative dispute resolutions, we talk about how bad litigation is, how bad going to court is. But Justice Brownstone, when is it really necessary? I mean, I'm sure that there is a time where people really do have to go to court.
Well, yeah, one of the chapters in my book tells people when you have to go to court. Basically, it's if there's been domestic violence and you need a restraining order, or there's a mental health issue, or there's substance abuse, or you're dealing with someone who just will not negotiate with you. If you've been kicked out of the house and the person will not communicate with you, you may have no choice but to go to court. So I don't think we're ever going to put the courts out of business because there will always be those situations like the ones I mentioned. But honestly, the vast majority of people who come to court don't need to and should be looking at mediation, parenting coaches, counseling, collaborative law. There's a lot of alternatives. And one of the things I've done on my talk show is to bring experts on the show to educate the public about some of these alternatives so that they can make informed decisions about whether litigation is really right for them.
You mentioned protection orders. Are they the same in Canada as they are in the U.S.? And do you feel they're overused or used as a strategy?
Well, most of the time, yes, they are used the same as in the United States. Are they overused? I think there's a small percentage of people who who fabricate allegations of violence in order to get a leg up on the litigation. But that is a fairly small group of people. By and large, the evidentiary test for getting a restraining order is pretty high. And courts are very mindful of the stigma that comes with a restraining order. And I don't think I'm sure there's some abuse, but I don't think it's significant.
But it seems like it's lowered the bar lately, where you can just say that if someone's invading my personal space, that's a violation.
Oh, I'd like to meet the woman that did a number on you.
Well, I mean, it does happen that way. If you are suffering emotional distress, that's enough for a protection order in the United States, anyway.
I will tell you that the world of cyberspace has made it more challenging, because now we see people accusing each other of harassment over Facebook, over MySpace. We never used to see this kind of thing before, but now we see Twitter harassment and text messaging harassment, and that never used to happen. I guess technology has made it easier to communicate with people, and that can be a bad thing too.
But it's also created some privacy issues within divorces, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, I had a case not long ago where one angry spouse emailed a picture of his wife in a very compromising position to her boss.
Oh, God.
Oh, that's awful. Awful. What about financial disclosure? Let's just change it up a little bit. I would think that getting full financial disclosure is a serious issue, and one in which, if you can't get it through negotiation, mediation, I mean, that's what you'd have to do, is go to court.
Yes, I guess it's counterintuitive to have to disclose to somebody you absolutely hate all the details of your finances. But that is what's required in order to reach a settlement. And what I say to parents is, I realize that you feel that, once you've broken up, this is an invasion of your privacy. But if you want your finances to ever have finality, if you ever want to have this part of your divorce really settled for good, you must disclose all of your financial circumstances. Otherwise, you are at risk of having the whole thing reopened later on if it turns out that you were not truly frank and forthcoming with all of the details.
Good point.
There's no point in spending a lot of money on a lawyer to have your affairs resolved, only to have it reopened later. And we do see a lot of that, because people think that they're getting away with some scheme to transfer assets to somebody else, but it usually comes back to bite.
What about appealing a ruling? Like, when do you think that should take place? And is the procedure a little bit different because now you're looking at a ruling made by one of your colleagues?
Well, I don't think anybody should ever appeal unless a lawyer has looked at the transcript and the evidence and advised them that it's worth appealing, that there was really an error made by the judge at first instance. And I have to tell you, in 16 years of being a family court judge in a big city, I think I've been appealed something like 7 or 8 times. It's very, very low. The percentage of appeals is very low, and the number of times I've actually been overturned was only twice.
Do you take that personally?
No, I don't take it personally because, in both cases, I still think I was right.
Right. But I think that sends out a message, buyer beware. If you're going to court, there is going to be one person that's going to be happier with the outcome than another. So the one that's not happy is going to say the judge made a mistake.
Yeah,
right?
I think that goes with the territory, and it's hard to accept as a judge that 50% of the people that come in front of me are going to leave the courtroom unhappy with me. Yeah, that's always painful. But I say to people all the time, we don't invite you here. We're not telling you that we are the best. We strangers who don't know you and don't know your children, that we are the best possible mechanism to resolve your conflicts. And if you two think that you can come up with a better solution, then do it.
Yeah, good for you. What about the self-represented litigant? Because I understand that the courthouses now, the courtrooms are getting more and more people coming in without legal representation. They're doing it on their own. Maybe they think because you can find so much information online that, hey, I can do just as good a job as a lawyer.
And plus the economy, right?
Yeah, that's right. 70% of all litigants in family courts throughout North America, in most major centers, 70% are unrepresented. They're representing themselves. They're making a mess out of their lives and of their court cases. They haven't even gotten legal advice, let alone have a lawyer actually representing them. It's a huge mistake because courts were never designed, the rules of procedure, the laws of evidence, the system was never designed to be navigated without legal help. And if it was that easy to do it, we wouldn't have gone to law school for 3 years. And so, unfortunately, it's a very frustrating experience to try to do this on your own. A lot of people feel they have to because they can't afford a lawyer, but I think most people can afford at least an hour or two of a consultation with a lawyer just to find out if you are, what your rights and obligations are, what is your paperwork done properly, do you have the evidence to support or defend your claim? It's well worth getting advice from a lawyer. And I know you're very strong on that in your book, Deb.
I am, and I send all of my clients, anyone who says that they want to do it on their own, I tell them that they must go to a lawyer for independent legal advice, even if they spend just 1 hour.
But
they need to know their rights and obligations.
There's also a portion of the public that do that. They hire an attorney, and when all is said and done, they feel, man, I could have done a better job myself.
Well, I don't think that people can be very objective about their own situations. And that's the greatest advantage of a lawyer. Besides knowing the procedure and knowing what evidence you're going to need, a lawyer has objectivity and can say to you, look, I know you feel that your version of what happened is the only version that any reasonable person could accept. But I'm telling you that what you're saying about the ex-partner is mostly irrelevant and will not help you and may even hurt you. And, good lawyers are managing their clients' expectations all the time, constantly telling them, look, I know this is what you want, but I got to tell you, this is not likely what you're going to get.
How do you know if you have the right attorney?
Well, I have a very good episode on that topic on my show, Family Matters. I tell people to watch that all the time because I got 2 lawyers to come and sit down with me and basically tell me what makes a good lawyer, what makes a good client, how do you manage your lawyer, how do you get the biggest bang for your buck? And I wrote a chapter on it in my book too. I think that it's there are lawyers there that are difficult and may even aggravate the disputes rather than try to settle them. And sometimes you do have to shop around. I know Deb did.
Yeah.
And and I thought that the material in Deb's book was very good in terms of explaining to someone what you need to know, what mindset you need to have when you go to a lawyer. And I thought that coming from a client, that was really helpful. It was more helpful than anything a judge can say because Deb actually went through it and understood the power imbalance, the sense of intimidation, the clock constantly ticking for fees when you need to talk, but that's not the person you should be venting to.
That's right.
You really covered that so well.
Thank you. I think people also have this feeling that if they're going to court and litigating, they need to find the meanest, baddest, most aggressive lawyer. And I don't think that that's what they should be looking for. They should still be looking for someone who's more settlement oriented.
Well, I think that a lot of people judge their lawyer by whether the person tells them what they want to hear. A lot of people give me the impression that their idea of a good lawyer is somebody who agrees with them. And that is not at all what you should be looking for. And we don't judge other professionals that way. We don't judge doctors or accountants that way. We're not looking for somebody that just agrees with us. We're looking for somebody who has expertise that'll tell us what we need to know. But with lawyers, somehow people feel like they know better and that the lawyer is only good if they tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah, and I know you cover a lot of this in your book too, which is so helpful. And I think that people listening to your message sometimes find it difficult to absorb because they're so emotional. So if you take the time to read your book and go through it slowly, the message can sink in, how important it is to really do your research, to understand the court process, that the outcomes might not necessarily be what you expect, and to really consider what you want your outcome to be like long term. Do you want to have an amicable relationship with your ex-partner and be able to co-parent effectively, or are you never going to be able to speak? You have to consider that very heavily, that really needs to weigh on your decision?
Well, today I had a couple in front of me. This is very typical. One of them wanted joint custody. And I said, well, are you able to make decisions together, communicate together? And the father said, no, I never want to see her again in my life. I never want to talk to her again. And he couldn't see the irony of asking for joint custody on the one hand, but never wanting to deal with that person again. And unfortunately, when people come to court slinging all that mud against each other, the other person is not going to forgive them all that easily. And so I always say to people, if you are going to go to court, before you open your mouth, every time you open your mouth, ask yourself whether what you're about to say, is it going to make your relationship with the other person better or worse? Because if it's going to make your relationship worse with that person, don't say it.
How does this whole situation, you're sitting watching all of these cases all day. How does this leave you feeling about the state of relationships?
Is that before or after I've taken my 3 or 4 Tylenol?
Yeah, good question. Before and after. How does it make you feel? Because, you're watching some very, very hard situations. People that are breaking up, their families are crumbling before your very eyes.
Well, I think that in truth, in the last, I would say the last 5 years, I think things have gotten a lot worse. And that's really because of the internet. I think that the way in which most people meet each other now is the internet. And the internet, it can be a wonderful thing, these social networking websites, but they're also a real trap for the unwary. And so we're seeing a lot more casual relationships that lead to big, big trouble because these people were worlds apart. They didn't know each other at all. They thought they did. Turns out that they're not who they thought they were. There's a lot of immigration fraud now with people claiming to be in love with you just so they can get into the country. Wow. We're seeing a lot of people who create entire personas for themselves, a whole backstory that's not true, and that we never used to see this before. And the other thing is we're seeing people break up easier now because you can just go back to the net and find somebody else. And so you don't have to try as hard as it used to be when you had to actually leave your home and go somewhere and try to meet someone. But now you can just cruise the world from your living room at home. You don't even have to get dressed or take a shower. You don't even have to try to look good. You can take a picture of yourself and put it on Brad Pitt's body and post that on the net, and fool people. And so we're seeing a lot more conflict, really high conflict stemming from internet relationships, people breaking up because they met somebody else on the internet. I actually think that the whole definition of what it is to have a relationship, what is a commitment, has completely undergone a total revolution. People, unfortunately, are going to find out the hard way that you have to approach relationships with people that you've met online with a lot of caution. And I think one of the most disturbing things for me that I've seen in the last 5-6 years is the number of lonely, socially awkward people out there who so desperately want to be in love that they will talk themselves into falling in love with somebody they have never met. And that did not used to happen. It never used to happen that people would actually say they were in love with somebody they've never met. They've only emailed and spoken to, maybe on the phone. But that's what happens. And frankly, it's not such a big worry, except that a lot of children are born out of these relationships. And then you've got big problems when people who were worlds apart suddenly come together and they find out they are still worlds apart. Some of them want to go back to where they came from, but with the child. So you get very high conflict mobility cases. You get serious immigration frauds where people are sponsoring other people here who didn't really, as soon as they got residency, they disappeared. there are people that have had they have children, they have ex-partners, they're in debt, they've got criminal records. There's all kinds of things that people find out about each other after it's too late.
So I think the message is you really need to take the time to get to know who your partner is. And oftentimes people aren't doing that.
Yeah, I think that the internet can be a wonderful thing. There are lots and lots of couples who meet online, and of course I don't see them because they're happy and they don't come to court. But I'll tell you, there's enough tragedies out there that would make your advice very, very worthwhile taking, Deb, and that is to be cautious. If it sounds too good to be true, it is.
It is.
Maybe there needs to be a way that you can do a background check on somebody. It's not that easy to do a criminal record check on somebody or a credit bureau check or, I suppose we're going to see businesses crop up one of these days where a person can do a check on somebody that they're wondering about.
Well, you know what, though? The thing is, if these red flags kind of pop up for you, I think that you need to pay attention to them. And too often people don't pay attention to them because of the loneliness and wanting to be in love and wanting to have a relationship. And the truth is, it's a Noah's Ark society. Everyone's in a couple. And sometimes people don't have the confidence to be on their own, so they feel that better to be with someone than no one at all, which is really not a healthy outlook.
No, it isn't. And there's also a myth out there. I'm surprised by this, but there really is a myth out there that if you are here illegally and you give birth to a child that's born here and is a Canadian citizen, that will somehow allow you to stay. And that's not the case. It's not the law.
Justice Brownstone, I think you've left us with some incredible messages and a lot of very good information. And especially your book provides us with an incredible insight into not only the courtroom, but really how a judge thinks. So I can't thank you enough for speaking with us today. And really, I think we could spend another 3 or 4 shows speaking with you.
3 or 4 hours, like right now.
Yeah.
Justice Brownstone, Deborah told me how great you were, and I've looked you up on the internet and watched some of your shows on FamilyMattersTV.com, and I am so impressed by you. If you're anything like you are on this radio show in court, you, sir, are amazing. And for our listeners, you can watch his programs on FamilyMattersTV.com. This is the first talk show ever hosted by a sitting judge, and you might like to know that 100% of the proceeds from his book, which we've been talking about, The Tug of War, go to the Children's Wish Foundation of Canada, and he doesn't receive any compensation for the TV show either. So here's a gentleman that's out here as a serving justice, helping you. And so, again, as I said in the beginning of the show, thank you so much for what you do.
Well, thank you both so much for giving people like me a platform to educate the public. I think you've got a wonderful show, and I wish you all the very best with it.
Thank you. Steve, that was like the most unbelievable interview. I think that the honesty and the clarity, what goes on in a courtroom from a judge, really needs to be hammered home for a lot of people because it's not a cakewalk. It's a serious issue, and people really need to consider what they want long term. And there's a lot of resources that are being spent going to court, and you're not going to necessarily have the outcome you want.
No, that's the problem. But he was amazing. I mean, what he does to educate us.
I think that is a real gift, and I don't think that anyone can just speak the way that he does. I think that he does it in such a way that is so easy to understand.
He needs to be a regular on the Smart Divorce radio show, don't you think?
He does. I think he's fabulous, but I think that there's so much more information that's covered in his book, Tug of War, that I really urge listeners to pick up that book, because if you are contemplating litigating, if you're thinking about divorce, wherever you are in the process, this book is really an invaluable read.
He loved your book, The Smart Divorce, right?
And that meant a lot to me.
How lucky are you to have a sitting justice recommend your book, Deborah?
I am very fortunate. I worked really hard on that book, and to have Justice Brownstone's endorsement really means a lot. You've been listening to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio with Deborah Moskovitch and Steve Peck. Tune in next week where we'll share more helpful information about divorce, empowering you to move forward with focus, hope, and confidence. And we want to hear from you, so please feel free to email your thoughts to info@thesmartdivorce.com or divorcesourceradio@gmail.com.
And you can listen to the programs on iTunes or on DivorceSourceRadio.com. If you'd like to leave a question on our listener line, you can do so at area code 248-686-2256.